issue in St. Louis. More than 300 protesters have been arrested so far in St. Louis, whose daily demonstration following the acquittal of a former white police officer, Jason Stockley, who was facing murder charges in the shooting death of 24-year-old Anthony Lamar Smith in 2011. Even journalists covering the protests have been pepper sprayed, beaten, and arrested, including newspaper reporters, documentary makers, live stream journalists who say they were just doing their jobs. The protests have continued daily since the September 15th acquittal, and protesters say they will not stop until they get justice. Yesterday, Missouri's Republican Governor Eric Greitens defended St. Louis police actions and said his predecessor, former Democratic Governor Jay Nixon, responded poorly to the 2014 protests in Ferguson, making it, quote, a safe place to loot and burn. You gotta just love how they will defend cops at every turn. Joining us via Skype from New York is Jordan Sheridan, an investigative reporter for the Young Turks. Jordan, you were one of the folks who have been arrested. Again, we've seen this before. Target the media, because that's who's showing what you're doing.
Yeah, the other night, they not only targeted the media, but the first people to get arrested were actually legal observers, obviously there to observe the police. So the police kind of enclosed in a four-way square, what they call a kettle, so that journalists, protesters had no exit, even though there was no instruction to exit. And they started arresting legal observers and then journalists. So it seems pretty evident St. Louis City Police are trying to get rid of the ears and the eyes so that they could do what they want with impunity. And
I've seen, of course, photos where they talked about how they confiscated materials for Molotov cocktails when the bottles actually said it was different vinegar or cider, whatever, that helps people when it comes to smoke from canisters. And again, they are trying to label anything essentially a terroristic action.
Yes, you know, they're in full militarized SWAT gear. You have protesters. It's an open carry state, but by my vantage point the other night, when my cameraman and I were arrested, I saw one protester with a gun. Other than that, you had a couple hundred unarmed, fairly peaceful. They were obstructing a highway. They've made their intentions. They want to block traffic, disturb business, but do it nonviolently. But from what I see, there was no protesters hurling anything at police, no violence coming from the protesters. I did see a police officer ram into an older man with his shield, knocking him to the ground. And obviously we've seen pepper spray, mace, tear gas. One 17-year-old protester told me he's been to the doctor, and the doctor told him he has permanent lung damage from the tear gas they've been disturbing. So it's very troubling. The mayor kind of gave me, I think, a little bit of lip service that she's called for an independent, she's called for a U.S. Attorney's Office investigation, yet the police department, you know, reports to the mayor, and they're not changing in terms of arresting journalists and I think disproportionately brutalizing protesters.
And what you have here again, you have the reaction from the Republican governor there in Missouri, and it just follows a similar pattern. That is, we will protect police interests at all costs and not really hold them accountable for their actions, which leads to the protest.
Yes, and I think part of why the police are just brazenly, I mean, arresting legal observers, journalists, beating protesters is, you know, from the top down. They know there will be no penalty. And it's not just at the protests. I mean, they got to be careful about arresting journalists, because then you see what goes on in the jail. I mean, I heard homophobic slurs at people in holding cells. Two trans men, a cop said, I don't know what they are, and they put them in a different cell. Them withholding medication, one person in my cell asking for 16 hours for depression, anxiety medication, to the point where it seemed he was very close to some type of mental situation, and they put him in solitary confinement. And talking to mostly African Americans in my jail cell, you just hear horror stories about the treatment by St. Louis police on, you know, mostly poor African American citizens. So the St. Louis Police Department, as we've seen in Ferguson, Baltimore, elsewhere, are really, you know, out of control.
All right, then. Jordan, we appreciate it, man. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Roland.
Weekdays on TV One.
I will never lie to you.
Oh, my God.
Roland Martin.
He doesn't want to talk to us. He wants to ignore us.
Uncensored.
Hell no. That ain't gonna cut it, boo.
Unapologetic.
No, that is fundamentally false. You are wrong.
Unfiltered.
He wants an America where we all look alike. He ain't talking about black people.
Unrelenting.
You better go work out, because you got a fight on your hands.
NewsOne Now with Roland Martin. Weekdays at 7 a.m. on TV One.